A lot of Christians today claim that beliefs about the rapture, the tribulation, and the millennium were invented in the 1800s by John Nelson Darby and popularized through the Scofield Reference Bible. But is that actually true? What did the earliest Christians living in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries actually believe about the end times? Before the Council of Nicaea, before Constantine the Great, and before Augustine. When you read their ancient writings, you'll discover many of the same ideas that are being heavily attacked and criticized online today. Here are 7 end times beliefs that were present in the early church. Number 1, a literal 1,000-year kingdom. Many ancient Christians believed that immediately after Jesus returns to earth to judge the nations, he will rule and reign with the resurrected saints from Jerusalem for a literal 1,000-year period. They didn't see Revelation 20 as symbolic, but as a physical future kingdom where Jesus reigns from the throne of David. Justin Martyr makes this clear in his work, Dialogue with Trypho. But I and others who are right-minded Christians on all points are assured that there will be a resurrection of the dead and 1,000 years in Jerusalem, which then will be built, adorned, and enlarged as the prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah and others declare. Many Christians during this period also connected the millennial kingdom to the creation week, viewing it as the coming 7th-day Sabbath rest after 6,000 years of history. Irenaeus makes this claim in his famous work Against Heresies. For in as many days as the world was made, in so many thousand years shall it be concluded. For the day of the Lord is as 1,000 years, and in 6 days created things were completed. It is evident, therefore, that they will come to an end at the 6,000th year. Hippolytus in his commentary on Daniel also makes a similar statement. For the Sabbath is the type and emblem of the future kingdom of the saints, when they shall reign with Christ, when he comes from heaven, as John says in his Apocalypse. For a day with the Lord is as 1,000 years. Since then, in 6 days God made all things, it follows that 6,000 years must be fulfilled. Finally, Tertullian also clearly states his belief in a literal 1,000-year kingdom of the saints in his work Against Marcion. We do confess that a kingdom is promised to us upon the earth, although before heaven only in another state of existence, inasmuch as it will be after the resurrection for 1,000 years in the divinely built city of Jerusalem. These quotes show that the idea of a 1,000-year kingdom was not only present in the early church, but that it was most likely the dominant view among believers during this period. Number 2, the resurrection prior to the millennial reign. The resurrection of believers is a foundational event to any form of true Christianity. All forms of Orthodox Christianity affirm the resurrection of all believers, when the saints will be resurrected with Jesus and rule with him in glorified bodies. This is why Paul refers to Jesus as the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep in his first letter to the Corinthians. Just as Jesus was resurrected after his death, all true Christians are destined to be raised and glorified with him. After the 4th century, the church began to teach that there would be one universal resurrection event for both the righteous and unrighteous, and that the resurrection would lead directly into the new heavens and new earth. But this is different from what the church taught prior to the 4th century. In the Didache, which is one of the earliest Christian documents available, it records that the resurrection will take place just after the reign of Antichrist and prior to the return of Jesus. And then shall appear the signs of the truth. First, the sign of an outspreading in heaven, then the sign of the sound of the trumpet, and third, the resurrection of the dead. Yet not of all, but as it is said, the Lord shall come and all his saints with him. Then shall the world see the Lord coming upon the clouds of heaven. This timeline is important, as it seems to not only allude to the resurrection occurring near the end of the reign of the Antichrist, but also that not all would be resurrected, possibly implying 2 different resurrection events for the saints and the condemned. One at the start of the millennium for the righteous, and one at the end of the millennium for the condemned. Irenaeus shares this framework in Against Heresies, where he says, "And therefore, when in the end the church shall suddenly be caught up from this, it is said, there shall be tribulation such as not been since the beginning, neither shall be. For this is the last contest of the righteous, in which, when they overcome, they are crowned with incorruption." Lactantius in Book 7 of the Divine Institutes also goes into detail regarding the resurrection. He even explicitly mentions how there will be 2 different resurrection events, one near the start of the 1,000 years for the righteous, and one at the end of the 1,000 years for the unrighteous. But he, when he shall have destroyed unrighteousness and executed his great judgment, and shall have recalled to life the righteous, who have lived from the beginning, will be engaged among men 1,000 years, and will rule them with the most just command. Regarding the second resurrection event, he says, "When the 1,000 years shall be completed, at the same time shall take place that second and public resurrection of all, in which the unrighteous shall be raised to everlasting punishments." Number 3, a literal Antichrist figure. The early church also believed in a future human ruler often referred to as the Antichrist. They clearly identified this figure as the man of lawlessness spoken of by Paul in his second letter to the Thessalonians. This is important to understand, as many claim that Paul was writing of Nero or some other Roman emperor during the early church period. The early church, however, clearly believed that Paul was writing about the Antichrist who would appear and reign just prior to the return of Jesus at the end of the age. The DDK identifies the Antichrist as the world deceiver. And then shall appear the world deceiver as the Son of God, and shall do signs and wonders, and the earth shall be delivered into his hands. And he shall do iniquitous things, which have never yet come to pass since the beginning. Irenaeus directly ties the Antichrist figure to the man of lawlessness spoken of by Paul, and claims that he will take his seat in the temple of God. For when he, Antichrist, has come, and of his own accord concentrates in his own person the apostasy, and accomplishes whatever he shall do according to his own will and choice, sitting also in the temple of God, so that his dupes may adore him as the Christ. Hippolytus in his work on Christ and Antichrist connects the beast of Revelation with the Antichrist at the end of the age. By the beast then coming up out of the earth, he means the kingdom of Antichrist, and by the two horns he means him and the false prophet after him. Number 4, a future fulfillment of Daniel's 70th week. Another idea that has recently been overlooked or criticized is the belief in a future fulfillment of Daniel's 70th week. This is actually far more important than people realize. In Daniel chapter 9, Daniel lays out the 70 weeks prophecy, and seems to indicate that the 70th week is distinct from the previous 69 weeks. It has become somewhat trendy to mock those who claim that there is a gap between the 69th and 70th weeks. It's clear, however, that most of the church prior to the 4th century believed that the 70th week would be fulfilled just prior to the return of Jesus, and would be directly connected to the reign of the Antichrist. Hippolytus again, in his work on Christ and Antichrist, makes the clearest statement that ties the words of Daniel to the reign of the Antichrist. For he says, "And 1 week will make a covenant with many, and it shall be in the midst of the week my sacrifice and oblations shall cease." By 1 week, therefore, he meant the last week, which is to be at the end of the whole world. Many claim that all 70 weeks were fulfilled during the first coming of Jesus, and claim that dispensationalists insert an arbitrary gap of time between the 69th and 70th weeks of Daniel. But as Hippolytus has demonstrated, the idea of a gap between the 69th and 70th week is not a modern invention, but has its roots all the way back in the earliest days of Christianity itself. Irenaeus makes the same claim regarding Daniel's 70th week, and explains that the reign of the Antichrist will take up half of the week, or 3.5 years. And then he points out the time that his tyranny shall last, during which the saints shall be put to flight, they who offer a pure sacrifice unto God. And in the midst of the week, he says, the sacrifice and the libation shall be taken away, and the abomination of desolation shall be brought into the temple. Even unto the consummation of the time shall the desolation be complete. Now 3 years and 6 months constitute the half week. It's also worth noting that Irenaeus goes as far and against heresies to mention that these interpretations about a future 70th week fulfillment, a literal Antichrist, and a literal 1,000-year kingdom come from people who heard these things from John the Apostle himself. The predicted blessing, therefore, belongs unquestionably to the times of the kingdom, when the righteous shall bear rule upon the rising from the dead, as the elders who saw John, the disciple of the Lord, related that they had heard from him how the Lord used to teach in regard to these times. Number 5, the two witnesses preaching in Jerusalem. The idea of two witnesses preaching in Jerusalem during the 70th week can also be found among the writings of the ancient church. Many who don't follow a more literal reading of Revelation often attempt to view the two witnesses as symbolic of the church in the ancient past. But this was far from the typical view among the church prior to the 4th century. Hippolytus claims that the two witnesses will be Enoch and Elijah, literally preaching from Jerusalem. By 1 week, therefore, he meant the last week, which is to be at the end of the whole world, of which week the two prophets Enoch and Elias will take up the half, for they will preach 1260 days clothed in sackcloth, proclaiming repentance to the people and to all the nations. Tertullian makes a similar claim in On the Soul, saying that Enoch and Elijah did not experience death because they will be used by God during the reign of the Antichrist. Enoch no doubt was translated, and so was Elijah, nor did they experience death. It was postponed, and only postponed, most certainly. They are reserved for the suffering of death, that by their blood they may extinguish Antichrist. Lactantius is unique in his writing, as he makes the claim that rather than two witnesses, there will be one prophet who will oppose the Antichrist. But this figure seems to be fulfilling the office of the two witnesses described in Revelation. When the close of the times draws near, a great prophet shall be sent from God to turn men to the knowledge of God, and he shall receive the power of doing wonderful things. Another king shall arise. He shall fight against the prophet of God, and shall overcome and slay him, and shall allow him to lie unburied. But after the 3rd day he shall come to life again, and while all look on and wonder, he shall be caught up into heaven. Number 6, the regathering of the Jews. While the regathering and ultimate conversion of the Jews back to God is not as common in the early church as some of the previous ideas listed, there are still some ancient authors who allude to the physical descendants of Abraham playing a prophetic role in the end times. Hippolytus claims that the Antichrist would pretend to be the Jewish Messiah, would come from the line of Dan, and would be the one to regather the Jews back to the land of Israel. And he in like manner will bring together a people that is scattered abroad, And under this was signified none other than Antichrist, who is also himself to raise the kingdom of the Jews. Number 7. The Third Temple. Many of the ancient Christians also believed that eventually there would be a literal rebuilt Third Temple in Jerusalem. Hippolytus again explicitly states that there would be a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem built by the Antichrist, when he contrasts the miracles of Jesus to the false signs of the Antichrist. The Savior raised up and showed his holy flesh like a temple, and he will raise up a temple of stone in Jerusalem. Cyril of Jerusalem, who actually shows up later in history during the 4th century, states that he believed the Antichrist would erect the temple in Jerusalem. He mentions that the temple spoken of by Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2 is clearly speaking of the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. What temple then? He means the temple of the Jews, which has been destroyed. For if he comes to the Jews as Christ and desires to be worshipped by the Jews, he will make great account of the temple, that he may more completely beguile them. Hopefully these 7 ideas found in the early church can help clear up some confusion surrounding what the ancient church prior to the 4th century actually believed and expected regarding to the 70 weeks of Daniel prophecy, the reign of the Antichrist, the resurrection event, the return of Jesus, and the millennial reign. While I'm not trying to argue that the early church was dispensational by any means, I feel like the ideas associated with dispensationalism are under constant attack and even viewed as dangerous, when in reality, many of the ideas found in dispensational eschatology overlap with the views of the early church. I'm also not trying to appeal to the church fathers as infallible authorities that got everything right, but I wanted to demonstrate and cite them for the sake of proving that most of the ideas being attacked online were not made up in the recent past, but actually comparable or the exact same as those found among the writings of Christians just decades after the deaths of the apostles. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, please hit the like button and subscribe to show your support, and I'll see you in the next one.